Hello YouTube. UFOs have been coming to the land known as Kazakhstan for many long centuries. What I'll tell you today has to do with more recent times and the interest that the Soviet government had in the special UFO program called SETKA, which I mentioned before in my other videos, but so that you know, it was an unprecedented UFO and USO research program, a top secret one that was created in the Soviet Union in the 1978 period and lasted officially until 1991. And it consisted of the academic branches, where the scientists were involved, and the military branches. And Kazakhstan was one of the areas that definitely interested those scientists and the military people. Kazakhstan is a vast country in Central Asia and used to be one of the constituent republics of the Soviet Union until 1991. So that you know, at its western end, Kazakhstan borders the northeastern quadrant of the landlocked Caspian Sea. It's considered to be the world's largest lake and a great attraction to UFOs as well. Located between Russia, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, locked between two seas in the Caspian lowland, and on the western end by the Usturt Plateau, is the area called Mangyshlak, or also Mangystau Peninsula, land of the ancient tribe of Adai. This is a sun-drenched land, and there are no trees. There are just endless winds that blow over the vast steppes with very scant vegetation. The Mangystau, or Eternal Mountains, run from the northwest to the southeast of the Mangyshlak Peninsula. The Usturt Plateau is located on the southeast, a very interesting area, and I'll speak more than once about it. The northwestern part of the Mangyshlak Oblast, or region, is adjacent to the Caspian Sea. In the late 1970s, the Mangyshlak Oblast, or region, was part of the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic. It was quite big, the region, 167,000 square feet. There were 3 large cities and settlements, and the center was called Shevchenko. Today we call it Aktau. On August 7, 1979, very dramatic year for the UFO encounters and sightings in the Soviet Union. Well, that August, a scientific expedition consisted of a group of researchers from the Russian Space Research Institute, Институт космических исследований, which participated in the super-secret SETKA program. Those researchers were actually dispatched to the Mangyshlak region, and the group operated there until August 31. It had 4 scientists among them, including a very interesting one, Petrovskaya, and 3 others. Also, they had a representative from the Secret Military Institute, NEE-4. He worked with them. And this institute controlled the development, production, and integration of the strategic missile space technology in the Soviet armed forces. They maintained and serviced satellites and spaceships. They produced a special report, the scientists, and the researchers stated in their report of the expedition that the group was intended to be the first exploratory and methodical step with the goal of ascertainment of expediency of dispatch, output of activities, and efficiency of a small group. It's all bureaucratic talk, but this was very interesting. The group was dispatched rapidly because they had to determine by the summer of 1980 what steps were necessary when it comes to UFOs. While the goals were modest, the output of activities was quite impressive because the group had received 85 UFO reports and conducted the maximum possible analysis of the reports. The government scientists determined that the 35 UFO reports actually described rocket launches. Convergence of satellites accounted for 5% of the reports, or for 5 reports. Gunnery was responsible for the 4 UFO reports. One report actually described a bolide, but the 36 UFO reports were of unidentified objects. Of them, 10 cases were presumably scientific and technical experiments, and remaining 26 were genuine anomalous phenomena. That is, UFOs which could not be explained by military and civilian scientists. And the representative from the Secret Military Institute helped the team to separate scientific and technical experiments from other sightings. The scientific group had a number of investigations in Mangyshlak in that hot month of August of 1979, and they had interacted with the local KGB and the military units. What's interesting is they had problems on the ground, and there was in the reports you could see that they had actually got in touch with the local KGB people to help them get rid of those who tried to hinder them. It was a very interesting situation, and I'm sure we still don't know all the details because most of the SETKA files are unavailable. But I wanted to mention this. And as for the UFOs over Central Asia, well, they've been sighted there for thousands of years. And those who have observed them etched their impressions in petroglyphs, legends, manuscripts, and even photographs. The Mangyshlak Peninsula has many unique land formations that cannot be found anywhere else in the world. The first of these attractions is the lowest point in Kazakhstan and Central Asia. It's called the Karagiya Depression, also known as the Black Mouth, and happens to be one of the most anomalous areas in Central Asia. It is 130 meters below sea level, 40 kilometers long and 10 kilometers wide, and it's acknowledged to be the 5th lowest portion in the world. There are locusts, scorpions, snakes, and moving sands in that rocky desert, dwarf trees. That's how that land looks like. Many centuries ago, the Great Silk Road passed there. There are hundreds of ancient necropolises that remain in that area. And that's where unidentified flying objects that resemble red balls or red spheres have been sighted repeatedly. Apparently something attracts them to the depression. There was a very interesting report from the same year of 1979 when a Soviet engineer, Valery Rashkov, observed a red sphere flying at low altitude but at great speed. The case was actually investigated by the SETKA group while they worked in the area. There was a hypothesis that the UFOs have been attracted to Karagiya because it is located 40 kilometers from Aktau, where a unique nuclear power plant has been in operation since 1973. We still don't know why, but they are attracted to the Black Mouth. I also want to bring your attention to the UFO investigation team called Grupa Fact. The Mangyshlak Peninsula is not an easy area to access, and the exploration there is very dangerous and expensive. Many sightings are not recorded even today. Not all of the reports found their ways into the SETKA files, that secret Soviet program. But I keep my eyes open and I collect information, have been for years, and I correspond with the Russian ufologists throughout the former Soviet Union. What's interesting is that in April 10, 1992, a Russian newspaper, Молодежь Татарстана, published several articles about UFO investigators of the Mangyshlak Peninsula. The local researchers had been studying local UFO phenomenon for over 10 years by then, since the early 1980s. They had observed different UFO types over the peninsula. In the 1960s and 1970s, the so-called garland-shaped objects. In the 1980s, it was the silvery spheres, and in the early 1990s, the so-called black giants. Let's look at their research. Let's look at the garland-shaped UFOs. The most intensive period of the sightings of the garlands in the Mangyshlak and Ustyurt Plateau areas was at the end of the 1960s and beginning of 1970s. At the end of the decade, there were scant sightings. In the 1980s, there were just a few verified sightings, and mostly in the Ustyurt. The last sighting, as far as the Grupa fact knew about, took place in 1986. They assumed the sightings were of the ball lightings, but what about the rest of the sightings? Such unusual UFOs usually look like a chain of lights, seemingly hovering or in the air, sometimes slowly floating. The lights are usually red colored. Investigators in the Grupa fact discerned, after studying reported sightings, that in the median number of lights varied from 3 to 6. Most often the garlands were sighted in the nighttime, and the glow of the spheres was dull, not shimmering. Only 2 cases were reported of the UFOs in the twilight hours, when the sky was still somewhat light. The spheres that comprised the garland in such cases resemble objects made from metal of dark color with reddish hue, each 7 to 8 meters in diameter. There was no visible construction that connected the spheres. Nevertheless, the spheres, as if tied together by invisible threads, very smoothly and synchronically performed various movements. The invisible coupling had 2 functions. In one case, it was a rigidly fastened system, while in the other case it was flexible. In the first case, all the spheres of the garland UFO started moving at the same time in one designated direction, keeping the distance between them unchanged. The mutual layout of the spheres assumed correct geometrical shapes, triangles, rectangular, and polygon. In the second, flexible case, the movement was started by one of the spheres, and the rest repeated its trajectory. The UFO investigators noted that the leading sphere can be any of the spheres in the garland. The flight of the garland UFO was absolutely noiseless. They didn't react to the light signals, and there was never a case when technology was impacted by the UFOs. As well, unaffected were devices that were used for photography, but there were never any clear pictures made due to the nighttime hours and lack of quality film. Local ufologists believed that the famous Belgian triangles were typical examples of the rigidly fastened garlands, consisting of 3 spheres, probably the objects that were of large size, with color range from yellow to red, and sighted a single entity or in pairs, are also of the same variety. They were characterized by quite low flight altitude and noiselessness. Now, there was one case which was of special interest to the researchers. It took place in the heat of the summertime, when 3 geologists parked their vehicle at the edge of the precipice. They climbed to the top of the vehicle to sleep. Half an hour later, a yellow-colored sphere, which they initially mistook for the moon, smoothly moved into their direction along the shoreline. Having approached them, the object hovered, a blinding white light flared up, and the vehicle was inside a cocoon. The eyewitnesses described that they physically felt that light. The ray formed a brightly colored ring, about 10 meters in diameter, on the ground. The vehicle and its passengers were in the middle of the ring. The geologists were very scared, not so much of the event, but of the suddenness that how it took place. One of them recalled that he had only one thought in his mind: they will shoot at us, they will shoot. He tried to climb out from the sleeping bag, tearing off the fasteners. But most interesting was the fact that none of them screamed. Everything took place in the absolutely thick silence, and then the light was gone. The next day they woke up, and none of the geologists remember what happened. This story resurfaced in the memory of two of them, and at the same time, only 3 years later, when they read, independently of each other, the famous Soviet report of the very sinister 1984 case with a passenger aircraft. I'll talk about this case in some other video, because it was a very complicated investigation and people died as a result of the UFO encounter. Now back to Kazakhstan, to this case. The memories came back at once, as if the geologist always existed in the back, as if the memories always existed in the back of the mind, as if they remembered something they always knew but did not pay attention to, due to the insignificance of the fact, its commonness, lack of real interest. When one geologist read the article that I mentioned, he rushed to his former place of employment, found one of the other witnesses, and was convinced that the event, or phantasmagoria, as he described it to the group of fact people, that was not a dream. Both of them quickly recalled the details. Quite amazing was the explanation that itself appeared in the minds of the geologists after the UFO departed. The explanation was similar even in the smallest details, and calmed them to such a degree that they were able to peacefully lie down and sleep, and in the morning and subsequent days mentally did not recall the events of that amazing night. The explanation that they had in their minds was this: this was a helicopter of the border guards troops. It illuminated us to check the vehicle license numbers on its roof. It was as if the logical explanation was given, the explanation to all of the participants, but there were no numbers depicted on the roof of the vehicle, and they never before encountered such helicopters. The explanation could not be logical. Passionately told the researchers, they were told to the researchers by one of the geologists, because such spot checks are impossible. One important detail: if a helicopter could reach the altitude where its engine would be noiseless, it would not be able to eliminate such plot of land, and there were no such floodlights when the whole incident took place. And again, the UFO was actually noiseless. But the light that the geologists reported was tight, as if one could touch it and feel it. It was a very, very, very unusual case, and there are not many details. But there were also the silver-colored UFOs. In the early 1980s, the UFO investigation team Group of Fact had learned of strange rumors pertaining to silvery spheres. They waited for years for some government disclosure about the events. Some news of a foreign reconnaissance satellite that was shot down over the peninsula, but nothing really was reported. But again, we need to remember that the article was published in 1992, when the SETKA program was absolutely unknown to the population of the former Soviet Union, because the USSR existed just 1 year before. It's possible that the sightings of the silvery spheres were also the same that attracted attention of the Soviet UFO researchers from the secret government SETKA program. The group of fact team learned of strange rumors that circled in Shevchenko, the main city. Its residents carefully mentioned incredible, everyday events that involved silvery spheres. One case had to do with a sighting outside of the city by the Caspian Sea. The spheres were too far from the observers, and it was impossible to determine their size. The report was not taken seriously until confirmation came from geologists. The geologists not only observed the spheres, but also attempted to approach the objects. And here is where the strangers really began. The vehicle they were driving in could not approach the UFOs, despite the fact that they drove for 5 kilometers in the direction of the unidentified objects. It seemed like the car was immobile. Finally, the spheres vanished. According to the report, they burst like soap bubbles. From that day on, many witnesses described sightings to others in the city, but all their accounts were similar. However, the size of the spheres was mentioned, usually around 30 meters in diameter. Another interesting trait: the spheres appeared only in groups. Soon, local geologists stopped paying attention to them. There were actually photographs of the objects. The quality was poor, as it was difficult to make a photo of the silvery object over the desert. What came through were inexpressive white blots. Yet one photo did help determine that the spheres do not vanish, but very rapidly rise up. As the events unfolded very closely to the border, the matter had to become public. The team found out that some commission arrived in the city, rented a vehicle from a governmental entity, and left for some unknown itinerary. The commission returned, but without the equipment they brought with them, and quickly departed. The spheres were observed for another month and then disappeared. The unnamed author of the Молодежь Татарстана articles, member of the group of fact team, mentioned that those who observed the spheres reported the most amazing feeling they had after the encounters. It was like sensation of alienness of the object to the environment. It was like it didn't belong there. While the author did not personally observe the spheres, he did work in the desert at the time and made interesting discoveries. He found round sites of completely dead soil. The diameters range from 3 to 5 meters. He also discovered small circles of approximately 90 centimeters. The sites had perfectly round shapes, and even the alhagi, or camel's thorn, plant did not grow there. Supposedly, these were landing sites of the mysterious silvery spheres. There were witnesses who encountered here in the area jelly-like mush in the desert, in the areas of reported sightings. Perhaps this mush was the cause of the absence of life inside the sites. As of 1992, the team never did find out what commission had visited the area, where the equipment was placed, and whether there was any connection between the departure of the commission and the disappearance of the silvery spheres. And still, the mystery did not end there. The unknown author was told by his acquaintances of their experience on the Moscow-Krasnovodsk flight in 1990. They observed similar spheres flying in the single file along the shoreline. Today, this city in western Turkmenistan, a harbor at the Caspian Sea, has the name of Turkmenbashi. Similar sightings dating to the period of 88-90 were reported in the Turkmen media. Another confirmation, the author of the Молодежь Tatarstana articles received from his acquaintance who had served in the Soviet border guard units in the Caspian flotilla. He had observed the same similar spheres over the shallow waters through binoculars from the distance of 7 kilometers during one of his patrols. And the sighting was in the very interesting area of the Kara-Bogaz Bay. The team of local ufologists wondered as to what was covered by silvery shell of the spheres. What was inside? Was it a secret foreign military technology, alien technology, some illusion that caused massive hypnosis? Was it manifestation of multi-dimensional life form or something else? And who was that group that came to the city, that commission? I think we're dealing with another manifestation of the SETKA program. But now we need to talk about the so-called spindle from nowhere. This was a very interesting encounter that took place in the summer of 1990. That Saturday, the 5 researchers of the Group of Fact team were on their way to study the legendary depression of the Kara-Bogaz Bay. Unfortunately, they missed the chance to observe a tremendous UFO sighting elsewhere at the other part of the desert, where they actually stopped earlier in the morning. A column of vehicles came to their own stop in the afternoon, waiting for one of their vehicles that lagged behind. We're dealing with geologists here. Now, this geologist had a field meeting in the staff vehicle, and one of the younger scientists tried to not be at the meeting. He tried to abscond. When he slumped down toward the wheels, he felt something inexplicable above him. The feeling was that behind his back was something huge and frightening. He slowly turned around, clinging to the vehicle, and saw above, about 200 meters away, a black, colossal, huge thing. It seemed at first to cover half of the sky. Later, the geologist was able to determine that it was about 150 meters long. The black metallic object that hovered over the geologist was spindle-shaped. It looked velvety and did not have any sunlight on its surface. The UFO was hovering right over the geologist at a very close distance. Actually, it floated over him, leaving behind slight silvery haze. While the object's movement was very slow, it was visible. His first thought was that no one would believe him. According to his colleagues, he jumped inside the staff vehicle, yelling something incoherent. They ran outside and became witnesses to the most unforgettable scene. There were 10 of the observers. The conditions were appropriate for the observation: a short distance to the object, ideal visibility, absence of clouds and wind. The object slowly departed to the distance of 1.5 kilometers, and then it suddenly vanished. All that was left behind was a slight trail resembling chemtrail of an aircraft flying at high altitude. Some witnesses heard popping sound when the UFO disappeared. And when it became dark, the vehicle that lagged behind finally joined the column, and its team of geologists told the main group that they too observed the UFO. The spindle accompanied their vehicle for 20 minutes. It flew over them on a parallel course. It disappeared without a sound. Everyone agreed that the UFO resembled an aircraft without wings and tail. One interesting detail that was reported was the presence of openings in the hull, in the body of the object. Light burst out from them. There was no consensus as to the actual number of apertures. Usually it was reported that there were 4. Some reported the light to be of green or blue color. The rays of the light were short, more like cones of light. The author of the Молодежь Tatarstan articles mentioned that we should not forget the sighting took place during the daylight hours. That very same day, 3 observers saw a spindle-shaped UFO at a distance of 2 kilometers from the seashore. It was a black-colored and huge, and landed in the area of a freshwater lake. The witnesses visited that area and found no traces. The Grupa Fact researchers had more reports of black UFOs that had been observed only during the spring and summer in the area bordered by Mangyshlak Peninsula, the Karabogaz Bay, and the Usturt Plateau. There is no further information about the Grupa Fact researchers, despite my attempts to locate them. And the SETKA project's documents are inaccessible, locked away in some impenetrable files, archives of the Russian state. But I do want to tell you that those of you who are into Nazca lines and so forth, there are similar lines in the Usturt Plateau, and I'll mention them later again, but very unusual lines have been there for nobody knows how long and should really be researched one day. I collected other information about Kazakhstan, of course, and as much as I could. I had a very interesting report that in 1989 there was a cigar shaped over the Shevchenko city, and the same year over these northern regions of the country, people saw strange red spheres. There was a reported landing of the aliens in the Alma-Ata, as the city was called, area. In 1990, UFOs were reported all over Kazakhstan, and for days, especially on April 12th, June 22nd, December 20th, and if anybody has similar reports in other countries, now you have the dates to compare. As for 1991, there was a Belgian triangular type UFO over the capital. And what's interesting is that on April 1st, the local police were chasing a UFO. Very interesting. So what happened in Kazakhstan is that at the end of 1990, they came to a decision to create an academic commission to study anomalous phenomena with the Institute of the Academy of Sciences of that country. As far as we know, nothing is being studied today, but archives are there. They have been saved. There are reports of 960 different anomalous phenomena recorded over Kazakhstan, beginning with the 18th century. According to one of the most notable UFO researchers, Sergei Yefimov from Kazakhstan, most of the reports come from the eastern part of Kazakhstan. But here we need to understand why. Because of the space ports and testing centers, the Baikonur and the Plesetsk area. Obviously, that's where the military are doing their secret tests. And quite a lot reports come from the Almaty area. And again, after that, some other areas from eastern Kazakhstan, especially from Semipalatinsk. Okay, now we know about the military testing, we just don't know what is it they're testing. And there are a number of military testing ranges in Kazakhstan. Of course, Baikonur, Sari-Shagan. One of my previous videos, Shoot the UFO Down, I mentioned the incident in 1978 when a UFO was intentionally shot down, brought down by the Soviet armed forces for the purpose of basically taking it apart and studying and using its components for the improvement of the Soviet artillery, missiles, and so forth. There are other interesting reports, the Sari-Shagan testing range is one of the most interesting areas. For example, in 1965, reported by Lev Gindelis, who was a top Soviet scientist and one of the first UFO researchers, he mentioned a case when shining disk, which was flattened around and with very clear outlines, was noticed. The sky was black, but the disk was shining, and the scientists could record it quite easily. It was of the silvery yellowish color. It was more darker in the center. The object very smoothly and noiselessly moved in the easterly direction, and the observation took more than a minute. There was another observation from the same from the area between Lake Balkhash and Semipalatinsk from 1978, where a UFO hovered over the An-12 aircraft, and it looked like a turned over saucer, and it basically accompanied the aircraft to the city of Semipalatinsk, and then it just briskly rose up and disappeared. The color was silvery white. There were other reports. I just wanted to show you. I mean, Kazakhstan is one of the largest countries, and of course it consists of many interesting areas, and people there tend to report UFOs. Very interesting reports came from 1991 and from other areas. But it's the Sari-Shagan testing range that is interesting, and of course Sergei Yefimov thinks that it's nothing unusual that the reports come there, because that's where the military people conduct their anti-aircraft and space-based defense systems, and something unusual always takes place of this site. Over that site. Of course, we should not hope that the military will ever tell us. It's a secret situation there, and the weapons that are being tested are quite serious. But the UFOs tend to come to such areas regardless of the tests. And if the local military understands who we're dealing with, that's fine. But in my research, I found out that in many cases they do not. And they do come out, military people, and state so. Apparently, the creation of the Sari-Shagan by the Soviet government took place because of the United States, and because in the 1953, the United States began construction of the intercontinental ballistic missiles. So, of course, the General Staff of the USSR in August of 1953 asked the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the USSR to get a permission to ask to create such a test for the anti-ballistic defense in the Soviet Union. It took some time, and in 1956 the military engineers became creation of the testing range Sari-Shagan in the Lake Balkhash area, it was in the desert, Bet-Pak Dala Desert, where they started building this center. Very interesting area, by the way. Their UFOs had been sighted there for ages, well before the Cold War or the Soviet Union or the United States. All I can say is that they still continue using Sari-Shagan by now by the Air Force of the independent Kazakhstan. Apparently not long ago, in the early 2017, there were launches of the new types of rockets there. As for the interest of UFOs to Kazakhstan, well, the desert of Kazakhstan is not really a desert if you look at what's inside, what's hidden, at the treasures inside the desert. I think there is about 20% of the uranium that can be found there, and a few other metals that are very important. Also, which is very important, is there are so-called strategic metals. Outside of that, I want to mention that there is a tremendous amount of petroglyphs in the mountains of Hantao, myth and legends about the ancient civilizations. There is so much to find in Kazakhstan, and in the future I will tell you about a very unusual scientist who died years ago, Russian scientist who spent his life in Kazakhstan and who was able to obtain the petroglyphs of people living side by side with dinosaurs. And that's just one example. There are other anomalous areas of Kazakhstan that we should speak about, including, like I said, the Nazca lines of the area, and a few other very interesting paranormal phenomena. So if you ever have a chance to travel and see it for yourself, you should, but if not, I will bring you more information. Please subscribe to my channel, and thank you.